The wind howled mercilessly across the dusty streets of Promise Creek as Elizabeth Remington clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the whispers and stares of townsfolk following her like shadows at dusk. It was 1878, and the Colorado Territory was unforgiving to a woman alone, especially one with 3 young children trailing behind her like ducklings. "Mama, Johnny's shoes got untied again," whispered 6-year-old Mary, her blonde braids bouncing as she pointed to her younger brother who was indeed struggling with his laces. Elizabeth sighed, setting down her basket of laundry on the boardwalk. At 28, her face already showed the fine lines of worry that came with raising 3 children alone after her husband had died in a mining accident 2 years prior. She knelt to tie Johnny's shoes, ignoring the snickering from the women outside the general store. "That Remington woman," came the not-so-hushed whisper. 3 children and no husband. A respectable widow would have remarried by now or sent them to relatives back east. "Heard she turned down the banker's proposal," another voice added, "too proud for her own good." Elizabeth's fingers trembled slightly as she finished the knot. "There you go, Johnny. Now stay close to Mary and little Annie." 4-year-old Annie clutched her rag doll, her wide eyes taking in everything. At just 4, she was already learning that their family was somehow different, somehow less than others in the eyes of Promise Creek. Elizabeth stood, retrieving her laundry basket. She did washing and mending for several families in town, decent, honest work that barely kept food on their table and the rent paid on their small cabin at the edge of town. Her late husband's mining claim had proven worthless, leaving her with nothing but debts and memories. "Mrs. Remington," called Mr. Paulson, the general store owner, as she approached. Unlike most in town, he had always been kind. "Got that flour and sugar you ordered. Added some peppermint sticks for the young'uns, too." "Thank you, Mr. Paulson, but I can't afford nonsense," he said quietly. "Consider it payment for mending my wife's dress so beautifully. Never seen stitches so fine." Elizabeth's throat tightened with gratitude. "You're too kind." As Mr. Paulson wrapped her purchases, the bell above the door jingled. The atmosphere in the store instantly changed, conversations dying as a tall figure ducked through the doorway. Elizabeth didn't need to turn to know who had entered. The reaction of the townspeople told her everything. Isaac James had that effect on people. At 34, he was already a legend in these parts. A former cavalry scout turned rancher, his Double J Ranch was the largest spread within 50 miles. Widowed 3 years earlier, he rarely came to town except for supplies and business. When he did, people noticed. "Mr. James," Mr. Paulson greeted, his tone respectful. "What brings you to town today?" "Need supplies," came the deep reply. "And to post an advertisement for a housekeeper. Can't keep the place running and the children looked after proper like on my own anymore." Elizabeth gathered her packages, urging her children toward the door. The last thing she needed was an encounter with Isaac James. Their paths had crossed only a handful of times, and each time had left her flustered and tongue-tied. The man was intimidating even when he wasn't trying to be. "Mama, can I have my candy now?" Johnny asked, his voice carrying in the quiet store. "When we get home, dear," Elizabeth whispered, feeling eyes upon them. "Well, if it isn't the Remington brood," came a cutting voice. Hester Wilson, the banker's sister and the most vicious gossip in town, stood blocking their path to the door. 3 children and still no prospects, Elizabeth. Perhaps you should consider Mr. James's housekeeper position, though I doubt he wants the burden of someone else's brats underfoot. The store fell silent. Elizabeth felt her face flame with humiliation and anger. Her children pressed closer to her skirts, sensing the tension. "My children are not brats, Mrs. Wilson," Elizabeth said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "And we manage just fine without your concern." "Do you?" Hester's eyebrow arched. "Is that why Johnny's wearing boots with holes? Why little Annie's dress has been patched 3 times over? Pride is a luxury for those who can afford it, my dear." Elizabeth opened her mouth to reply when a shadow fell across them both. Isaac James towered over them, his weathered face impassive but his blue eyes sharp with something Elizabeth couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Your tongue's sharper than my skinning knife. Might want to be careful before you cut yourself with it." Hester bristled. "I was merely suggesting—" "I heard what you were suggesting," Isaac cut in. His gaze shifted to Elizabeth and her children, who stared up at him with wide eyes. For a moment, something softened in his expression. "Mrs. Remington," he said, nodding respectfully. "I've heard about your mending skills. My housekeeper left last month to get married, and the house is in disarray. 3 children of my own, aged 8, 6, and 5. They need someone who understands children." Elizabeth blinked in surprise. "Mr. James, I pay is $30 a month plus room and board for you and your children. Private quarters in the east wing of the house. Sundays off." He stated it matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather. The store had gone completely silent. $30 a month was more than Elizabeth could make in 2 months of laundry and mending combined. "Mr. James," Hester interjected, "surely you don't mean to bring her and her 3 fatherless children into your home. What would people say?" Isaac's gaze never left Elizabeth's face. "They'd say I hired the best person for the job. My children need someone who knows what it means to care for little ones, not just cook and clean." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "This is the address. Job starts Monday if you want it. Wagon will come for you and your belongings at dawn." Only then did he step aside, clearing their path to the door. Elizabeth clutched her packages tighter, her mind racing. "I'll consider it, Mr. James, thank you." As she ushered her children out onto the boardwalk, she heard Hester's indignant voice behind her, followed by Isaac's calm response that made her steps falter. "Those children need discipline, not coddling. They'll run wild on your ranch." 3 children raising themselves while their mother works her fingers to the bone to feed them. "That shows more discipline than most men I know," Isaac replied. "Besides, my 3 are waiting to call someone ma again. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Elizabeth hurried her children along, her heart pounding. Whether from fear or hope, she couldn't tell. The small cabin Elizabeth rented sat on the outskirts of town. A humble single-room structure with a lean-to addition she had built herself last summer to give the children more space to sleep. As she prepared their simple supper of beans and cornbread, her mind kept returning to Isaac James's offer. "Mama, are we going to live at the big ranch?" Mary asked as she helped set their wobbly table. Elizabeth smiled faintly. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. It would be a big change." "Would we have our own rooms?" Johnny asked, eyes wide with excitement. "Tommy Wheeler said the James place has more rooms than the hotel, and horses," Annie piped up, bouncing on her little stool. "Don't get your hopes up," Elizabeth cautioned. "I haven't decided anything." But as the evening wore on, as she tucked her children into their shared bed in the lean-to and returned to her own thin mattress by the stove, Elizabeth knew she had already decided. Pride was indeed a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her children wore patched clothes and had 2 small shoes. $30 a month would mean new clothes, proper shoes, maybe even a bit saved for their future education. Still, the thought of living under Isaac James's roof made her nervous. The man was intimidating, tall and broad-shouldered, with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through a person. Rumor had it he'd been a formidable scout during the war, then a respected cavalry tracker, before settling in Colorado territory. His wife's death 3 years ago had left him with 3 children and a reputation for keeping to himself. Elizabeth sighed, staring at the cabin's low ceiling. What choice did she really have? Winter would come soon, and their cabin was drafty even in autumn. The laundry work would dry up as the cold set in. And the children, they deserved better than this constant struggle. By morning, her decision was made. Monday dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the dead grass surrounding their cabin. Elizabeth had spent Sunday packing their meager belongings and saying goodbye to the few friends they had in town. Mr. Paulson had gifted the children each a small bag of candy for their journey, while his wife had pressed a jar of preserved peaches into Elizabeth's hands. "You're doing the right thing," Mrs. Paulson had whispered. "Isaac James is a fair man, if a bit rough around the edges. His children need someone like you." Now, as the wagon rumbled up the rutted path to their cabin, Elizabeth gathered her children close. "Remember what I told you," she said softly. "Best behavior at Mr. James's ranch. We are guests in his home, even if we'll be working there." "Yes, Mama," they chorused, excitement evident in their faces despite the early hour. The driver wasn't Isaac, but an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes who introduced himself as Hank, the ranch foreman. "Mr. James sends his apologies, madam," he explained as he helped load their trunks. "Had to ride out at first light to check on some calving heifers." The journey to the Double J Ranch took nearly 2 hours, winding through hills and valleys increasingly distant from town. Elizabeth watched as the landscape changed, becoming more rugged and beautiful with each passing mile. The children, initially chattering with excitement, eventually dozed off, lulled by the wagon's steady motion. "There she is," Hank announced finally, pointing ahead as they crested a hill. "Double J." Elizabeth gasped softly. The ranch spread out before them was far larger than she had imagined. A substantial 2-story house stood proudly in the center, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys, and even from this distance, she could see figures moving about ranch hands going about their morning chores. "It's like a small town," she murmured. Hank chuckled. "Mr. James employs 15 men full-time, more during roundup and branding. Over 2,000 head of cattle, 100 horses, and enough land that you can ride all day and not hit the property line in some directions." As they approached, Elizabeth gently woke her children, wanting them to see their new home before arriving. Their sleepy expressions quickly transformed to wonder as they took in the grand house and bustling activity. "Are we going to live there?" Johnny asked, pointing to the main house. "Yes. Mr. James said we'd have rooms in the east wing," Elizabeth replied, smoothing Annie's tousled curls. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and almost immediately the front door burst open. 3 children spilled out onto the porch, followed more sedately by an older woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Hank explained quietly. "Been cooking for the ranch since Mr. James's wife passed. She's been trying to manage the house too, but she's getting on in years." Elizabeth nodded, taking a deep breath before allowing Hank to help her and the children down from the wagon. The James children lined up on the porch, watching them with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Remington, Mrs. Abernathy greeted, stepping forward. "Welcome to Double J. Mr. James asked me to show you to your quarters and explain your duties." "Thank you," Elizabeth replied, gently urging her children forward. "These are my children Mary, Johnny, and Annie." The introduction seemed to break the ice. The James children moved forward, the oldest a boy with his father's blue eyes taking the lead. "I'm Thomas," he said with surprising formality for an 8-year-old. "These are my sisters, Sarah and Emma." 6-year-old Sarah, with blonde braids similar to Mary's, smiled shyly, while 5-year-old Emma clutched her brother's hand, observing Annie's rag doll with evident interest. "Why don't you young uns show the Remington children around while I take Mrs. Remington inside?" Mrs. Abernathy suggested. Thomas nodded seriously. "Yes, madam, we'll show them the swing by the oak tree first." As the children ran off together, already chattering excitedly, Elizabeth followed Mrs. Abernathy into the house. The interior was surprisingly warm and welcoming, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and large windows that flooded the rooms with light. But Elizabeth also noted the signs of neglect: dusty corners, tarnished silver frames, and curtains that needed washing. "Mr. James hasn't had a proper housekeeper since Mrs. Collins left to marry that storekeeper in Boulder," Mrs. Abernathy explained as they climbed the stairs. "I do what I can with the cooking, but these old bones can't keep up with cleaning and mending too, especially with 3 young uns running about." The east wing contained a surprisingly spacious suite of rooms: a sitting room with a small fireplace, a bedroom large enough for Elizabeth, and a second bedroom perfect for her children. "This was Mrs. James's sewing room and nursery before," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "Mr. James had the men bring in proper beds last week when he decided to hire someone with children." Elizabeth touched the quilt on her bed, clean and well made. "It's very generous. He's a fair man," Mrs. Abernathy said simply. "Lost his Kathleen 3 years back to fever. Been raising those children on his own since, with just my help and whatever ranch hands' wives could spare time." She paused, giving Elizabeth an appraising look. "Those children need a mother's touch. They're good kids, but they're wild as March hares sometimes." "I understand," Elizabeth said quietly. "My 3 keep me busy enough, and I'm with them every day." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Your duties will be keeping the house, mending, and watching over all 6 children when they're not in lessons. Mr. James hired a teacher from Denver who comes 3 days a week for schooling. You'll take your meals with the children, though Mr. James usually eats with them for supper when he's not out working late." The tour continued downstairs, with Mrs. Abernathy pointing out the kitchen, dining room, Mr. James's study, strictly off limits unless invited, and the various closets containing cleaning supplies. By the time they finished, Elizabeth's head was spinning with information, but she felt determined to prove herself equal to the task. "Mr. James should be back for supper," Mrs. Abernathy said as they returned to the kitchen. "Until then, why don't you get settled and acquainted with the children? First day's always for finding your bearings." Elizabeth nodded gratefully. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Abernathy." The older woman's stern face softened slightly. "Been a long time since this house had a proper woman's touch, Mrs. Remington. Those children deserve it, and so does Mr. James, though he'd never admit it." Elizabeth spent the afternoon unpacking their few belongings and exploring the house with her children, who had quickly formed alliances with the James children. Mary and Sarah were already thick as thieves, while Johnny trailed after Thomas with hero worship in his eyes. Little Annie and Emma sat on the nursery floor, solemnly introducing their dolls to each other. The easy way the children blended together eased Elizabeth's worries somewhat. Perhaps this arrangement would work after all. As the afternoon light began to fade, she heard the sound of horses in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Isaac James dismounting from a magnificent black stallion, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. He spoke briefly with some of the ranch hands before turning toward the house, and Elizabeth quickly stepped back from the window, her heart suddenly racing. "Mr. James is coming," Thomas announced, bursting into the nursery. Pa always checks on us when he gets back. Sure enough, heavy footsteps soon sounded in the hallway, and Isaac appeared in the doorway. He filled the frame, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides. He'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with a few threads of silver at the temples. His face was tanned from constant outdoor work, making his blue eyes seem even more striking. "Pa!" Emma cried, launching herself at him. He caught her easily, swinging her up into his arms with practiced ease. "Hello, Pumpkin," he said, his deep voice gentler than Elizabeth remembered. He nodded to Thomas and Sarah, then turned his attention to Elizabeth and her children who had instinctively moved closer to their mother. "Mrs. Remington," he greeted, "I see you've arrived safely. Are your quarters satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory, Mr. James," Elizabeth replied, finding her voice. "They're lovely, and your generosity is much appreciated." He nodded, setting Emma down. "Children need space to grow. House is big enough for all." His direct gaze made Elizabeth feel strangely self-conscious. She smoothed her skirts, aware that her simple blue dress, though clean and well-mended, was far from fashionable. "Mrs. Abernathy showed me around," she continued. "I'll begin my duties properly tomorrow, once we're settled." "No rush," he said. "Take the week to learn the rhythm of the place." "Mrs. Abernathy will help." His eyes moved to her children who were watching him with wide eyes. "And who might these young ones be?" Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on each child's head as she introduced them. "This is Mary, my eldest. She's 6. This is Johnny, who's 4. And this is Annie, who just turned 4 last month." Isaac nodded to each child solemnly, as if they were adults deserving of respect. "Welcome to Double J Ranch. Any problems, you come to me or your mother. No secrets in this house." Johnny, usually shy around strangers, especially men, stepped forward. "Do you really have horses we can ride, sir?" A ghost of a smile touched Isaac's stern mouth. "We do. Got a gentle pony for the little ones, and Thomas here can show you the ropes when you're ready." Thomas puffed up with importance at this responsibility. "I can teach them, Pa. I'm a good rider now." "That you are, son." Isaac's large hand rested briefly on Thomas's head, a gesture of affection that spoke volumes. He turned back to Elizabeth. "We eat at 6. Simple rules at the table: clean hands, proper manners, no interrupting adults. Otherwise, let children be children." With that, he nodded once more and departed, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Elizabeth released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Isaac James was not a man of many words, but those he spoke carried weight. His presence filled a room even after he'd left it, and she couldn't decide if that made her nervous or reassured. "Papa's horse is named Thunderbolt," Thomas informed Johnny proudly. "He's the fastest in the county." "Nobody can ride him but Pa. Can we see him?" Johnny asked eagerly. "Tomorrow," Elizabeth interjected. "It's nearly supper time now, and we all need to wash up." Getting 6 excited children washed and presentable for dinner proved to be a challenge, but Elizabeth managed it with time to spare. She took extra care with her own appearance as well, pinning her chestnut hair neatly and changing into her one good dress, a simple navy blue affair with white collar and cuffs that she saved for Sundays. The dining room was warm and inviting when they entered, with a large oak table that could easily seat 12. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Isaac was already seated at the head of the table, his large frame making the substantial chair look almost small. "Sir," Elizabeth began hesitantly as she helped the younger children into their seats, "should we wait for the ranch hands to join us?" Isaac looked surprised. "Ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse. Mrs. Abernathy takes their meals over. This table is for family and household. Family. The word hung in the air between them as Elizabeth took her seat. This wasn't her family, she reminded herself. This was employment, generous employment, but employment nonetheless. The meal progressed with surprising ease. Isaac asked Thomas about his day's lessons and listened attentively to Sarah's story about a bird's nest she'd found. Even little Emma had her moment to share news of her doll's new friendship with Annie's rag doll. Then, to Elizabeth's surprise, Isaac turned his attention to her children. "And what did you three discover today?" he asked, his deep voice gentle. Johnny, emboldened by the good food and welcoming atmosphere, launched into an excited description of the chicken coop and how Thomas had shown him where the hens laid their eggs. Mary spoke of the library she'd discovered, eyes shining at the prospect of so many books. Even little Annie volunteered that she had seen a butterfly on the porch railing. Isaac listened to each child with the same serious attention he'd given his own, nodding at appropriate moments and asking follow-up questions that showed he was truly listening. Elizabeth felt a warmth spread through her chest at his kindness to her children. She had expected many things of this arrangement, but not this. As the meal ended, Elizabeth rose to help clear the dishes, but Isaac shook his head. "Mrs. Abernathy handles that, part of our arrangement. Your duties begin tomorrow." "I don't mind helping," Elizabeth protested softly. "Rules are rules, Mrs. Remington. You've had a long day of travel and settling in. Take the evening to rest." His tone brooked no argument, so Elizabeth acquiesced, leading the children upstairs for baths and bedtime stories instead. As she tucked her three into their new beds, real beds with proper mattresses and warm quilts, she felt a profound gratitude mingled with uncertainty. "Do you like it here, Mama?" Mary asked sleepily as Elizabeth kissed her forehead. "It seems very nice," Elizabeth replied carefully. "Mr. James is being very kind to give us such a lovely place to stay." "Thomas says his pa never smiles," Johnny mumbled, already half asleep. "But he's not scary." "No, he's not scary," Elizabeth agreed. "He's just a busy man with a lot of responsibilities." Annie was already asleep, clutching her rag doll. Elizabeth smoothed her daughter's curls and whispered good night before retiring to her own room. As she prepared for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her seemed different somehow, still tired, still worried, but with a spark of something like hope in her eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself. "That's all you can do." Outside her window, the vast Colorado sky spread out in a canopy of stars, brighter and more numerous than they ever appeared in town. Somewhere on this sprawling ranch, Isaac James was perhaps looking at the same stars, the weight of his responsibilities no lighter than her own, just different. Elizabeth closed her eyes, allowing herself to hope just a little that perhaps they had both found exactly what they needed. The first week at the Double J passed in a blur of activity as Elizabeth established routines and became acquainted with the sprawling ranch house. Each morning, she rose before dawn to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the family and the ranch hands. The older woman was gruff but kind, offering guidance without being overbearing. "Mr. James likes his coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in," she advised on the second day. "And the children all take their eggs different ways. Thomas likes his fried hard, Sarah scrambled with cheese if we have it, and little Emma only eats the whites." Elizabeth absorbed these details and 100 others, determined to learn the household's rhythms. Her own children adapted quickly to ranch life, following the James children like shadows and soaking up new experiences with the resilience of youth. Isaac himself remained something of a mystery. He joined them for breakfast and supper when not working far afield, listened attentively to the children, and treated Elizabeth with unfailing courtesy. But he rarely initiated conversation beyond the necessities, and his expression remained guarded, as though maintaining a careful distance. By the end of the first week, Elizabeth had established a cleaning schedule, inventoried the linens, finding them sorely lacking, and begun teaching Mary and Sarah basic needlework in the evenings. The house already felt more orderly, with fresh curtains washed and hung, floors polished to a warm glow, and silver picture frames restored to their original shine. It was on a Saturday afternoon, with the older children playing under the supervision of Thomas's nurse Maria in the yard, that Elizabeth discovered the locked room at the end of the west hallway. Curiosity got the better of her, and she asked Mrs. Abernathy about it as they prepared vegetables for the evening meal. The older woman's hand stilled briefly. That was Mrs. James's room, her private sitting room for reading and sewing. Mr. James had it locked after she passed. Nobody goes in there. I see, Elizabeth murmured, understanding blooming. A shrine to his lost wife, preserved exactly as she'd left it. He loved her something fierce, Mrs. Abernathy continued, her usual brusque tone softening. Kathleen was a gentle soul city bred from Denver, not made for ranch life, but she tried. Fever took her quick, just 3 days from first symptom to last breath. Mr. James hasn't been the same since. Elizabeth nodded, thinking of her own grief after losing Richard. Different circumstances, a mining accident rather than illness, but the hollow ache of loss was universal. The children remember her, she asked quietly. Thomas does most clearly. Sarah has some memories. Emma was just too knows her mother from pictures and stories more than true recollection. Mrs. Abernathy sighed. They need a mother's touch, those three. I'm just the housekeeper, Elizabeth reminded her gently. Mrs. Abernathy gave her a shrewd look. For now. Before Elizabeth could respond to this cryptic comment, the kitchen door burst open and Thomas rushed in, his face pale. Mrs. Remington. Johnny climbed the corral fence and fell. He's hurt. Elizabeth dropped the potato she'd been peeling and hurried outside, heart pounding. She found Johnny sitting in the dirt beside the corral, tears streaming down his dusty face while Sarah knelt beside him. A ranch hand Miguel, she remembered, was examining his arm with gentle fingers. Johnny, Elizabeth gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. What happened? Wanted to see the new foal, Johnny hiccuped through his tears. Slipped. Miguel looked up. Arm's not broken, madam, just sprained good. Wrist needs wrapping. Elizabeth gathered Johnny into her arms, relieved it wasn't worse but still shaken. Thank you, Miguel. I'll take him inside and tend to it. As she stood with Johnny in her arms, she became aware of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Isaac James rode into the yard on Thunderbolt, dismounting in one fluid motion before the horse had fully stopped. He strode toward them, concern evident in his usually impassive face. Thomas rode out to find me, he explained, his eyes moving quickly over Johnny's tear-streaked face and cradled arm. How bad? Just a sprain, Elizabeth replied, unconsciously holding Johnny a little closer. He wanted to see the foal. Isaac nodded, reaching out to gently ruffle Johnny's hair. Brave boy not to wail like a banshee with a sprain. I've seen grown men cry with less. He paused, his blue eyes meeting Johnny's. Next time, ask one of the men to lift you up to see. That's what they're here for. No need for climbing. Johnny nodded, sniffling. Yes, sir. Come, Isaac said, turning toward the house. I have liniment and bandages in my study. Elizabeth followed him, surprised when he led them not to the kitchen but to his private study, the room she'd been explicitly told was off limits. It was a masculine space with a large desk, leather chairs and bookshelves lining the walls. A cabinet in the corner, when opened, revealed an assortment of medical supplies. Ranch this size. Someone's always getting hurt, Isaac explained as he selected a jar of liniment and a roll of bandages. Sit here, Johnny. Elizabeth perched on the edge of a leather chair, Johnny in her lap, as Isaac knelt before them. With surprisingly gentle hands for such a large man, he applied the liniment to Johnny's wrist and wrapped it in a neat bandage. Not too tight, he asked, securing the end. Johnny shook his head, his tears subsiding as he watched Isaac work with fascination. Good man, Isaac said, his voice gruff but kind. First ranch injury is a rite of passage. Now you're officially a cowboy. Johnny's eyes widened. Really? Really? Isaac's mouth quirked in what might almost have been a smile. Though next time, try for a less painful initiation. He rose, replacing the supplies in the cabinet. Elizabeth stood as well, settling Johnny on her hip despite his being really too big for such treatment. Thank you, Mr. James, she said sincerely. And I apologize for Johnny's misbehavior. I should have been watching more closely. Isaac shook his head. Boys will be boys, Mrs. Remington. Can't wrap them in cotton wool. Besides, ranch children need to learn by doing, and sometimes that means falling. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment, and Elizabeth felt a strange flutter in her chest. Then he cleared his throat and gestured to the door. Better get some cold compresses on that wrist tonight. Keep the swelling down. Yes, of course, Elizabeth murmured, carrying Johnny from the study. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elizabeth sat by her bedroom window, gazing out at the starlit landscape. The incident with Johnny had shaken her more than she cared to admit, not just the injury itself, but Isaac's response to it. His gentleness with her son, his understanding instead of anger, had touched something deep within her. For 2 years, she had carried the weight of parenthood alone, making every decision, shouldering every worry. Today, for just a brief moment, that burden had been shared. It was a dangerous feeling to get used to. The following Sunday dawned clear and beautiful, with the aspens in the distance showing the first golden hints of approaching autumn. After breakfast, Isaac announced that church services would be held in the ranch's small chapel, a tradition, he explained, for those Sundays when traveling to town for services wasn't feasible. Chapel? Elizabeth asked, surprised. My wife was religious, Isaac explained. Had the chapel built our second year here. Nothing fancy, but it serves its purpose. Ranch hands and their families attend too. The chapel turned out to be a charming structure nestled among trees a short walk from the main house. Simple wooden pews faced a small altar, and windows along both sides filled the space with light. Elizabeth was touched by this evidence of Isaac's devotion to his late wife's wishes. The service was led by Hank, who apparently had been a lay preacher before becoming a ranch foreman. He had a gift for storytelling that kept even the youngest children engaged. Afterward, the families gathered outside for a picnic lunch prepared by Mrs. Abernathy, with the children playing tag among the trees while the adults conversed in small groups. Elizabeth found herself sitting beside Isaac on a wooden bench, watching as Johnny, his wrist still bandaged but seemingly forgotten in his play, chased after Thomas and some of the ranch hands' children. He seems recovered, Isaac observed. Children bounce back quickly, Elizabeth agreed. Though he slept in my bed last night, something he hasn't done in over a year, Isaac nodded. Thomas did the same after his first fall from a horse, pride by day, seeking comfort by night, the way of boys. A comfortable silence fell between them. Elizabeth found herself studying Isaac's profile as he watched the children play. In repose, the stern lines of his face softened somewhat, and she could see echoes of Thomas in his features. Your children have adapted well to having us here, she ventured after a moment. Children crave structure and care, Isaac replied simply. You've provided both. They're wonderful children, Elizabeth said sincerely. You've done a remarkable job raising them alone. Isaac turned to look at her then, his blue eyes intent. As have you with yours, Mrs. Remington. It's no small feat. The directness of his gaze made Elizabeth glance away, suddenly self-conscious. Mine were younger when their father died. In some ways that made it easier. They've had less to unlearn, less to grieve. And in other ways harder, Isaac said quietly. No memories to hold on to. Elizabeth nodded, surprised by his perception. Johnny barely remembers Richard, Annie not at all. Does that bother you? Isaac asked. That they might forget him entirely. The question was unexpectedly personal, and Elizabeth considered it carefully before answering. Sometimes. But mostly I want them to be happy, to feel secure. Memories are a luxury when basic needs must be met first. Isaac's expression turned thoughtful. A practical viewpoint. Necessity teaches practicality, Elizabeth replied with a small smile. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded as if coming to a decision. The children's teacher arrives tomorrow. Mrs. Harrison comes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings from 9 until noon. Thomas and Sarah attend lessons, along with 2 of the ranch hands' children. Emma is still too young, but she likes to sit in sometimes. Mary would love to join if that's permitted, Elizabeth said. She's quite advanced in her reading for her age. Of course, Isaac agreed readily. Education is important. One advantage of ranch life: children learn practical skills every day just by living here. But book learning matters too. As he spoke, Elizabeth noticed a smudge of dirt on his collar, evidence that, despite being the ranch owner, Isaac worked alongside his men. The observation humanized him somehow, made him seem less the intimidating figure and more a man doing his best with the responsibilities he carried. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma running up to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Papa, Annie's doll fell in the creek. Miguel saved her, but she's all wet." Isaac stood immediately. "Is Annie upset?" Emma nodded solemnly. "She's crying, but Sarah told her we can fix her doll." "Of course we can," Elizabeth assured her, rising as well. "Let's go see." They found Annie by the small creek, being comforted by Mary and Sarah while Miguel wrung water from the sodden rag doll. Annie's face was tear-streaked, her blue eyes swimming with fresh tears as she looked up at her mother. "Mama, Molly fell in," she hiccuped. Elizabeth knelt beside her. "I see that, sweetheart, but she'll dry out good as new." "Her stuffing's all wet," Annie said mournfully. Isaac crouched down beside them, his large frame making the action look somewhat awkward. "When Sarah's doll fell in the horse trough last summer, Mrs. Abernathy showed us a trick. We can unstitch part of the back, take out the wet stuffing, dry it in the sun, and put fresh stuffing in until the old dries." Annie looked at him with hope dawning in her tear-filled eyes. "Really, really," he confirmed, his deep voice gentle. "Your mama's good with a needle. She can do the stitching part better than anyone." Elizabeth felt a rush of warmth at his confidence in her skills. "We'll make Molly good as new, Annie. I promise." Annie sniffled once more, then nodded bravely. Isaac reached out, large hand gentle as he wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Brave girl," he said simply. The moment was brief, but as Elizabeth met Isaac's eyes over Annie's head, something shifted between them, a silent acknowledgement that they shared more than just a household. They shared an understanding of what it meant to comfort a child's tears, to make the world right again when it had momentarily tilted on its axis. For the first time since arriving at Double J Ranch, Elizabeth felt not like an employee but like a partner in the complex dance of raising children. It was a dangerous feeling, one she quickly tucked away. Isaac James was her employer, not her husband. The sooner she remembered that, the safer her heart would be. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that became increasingly comfortable. Mornings began with breakfast for the family and ranch hands, followed by lessons for the older children with Mrs. Harrison, a stern but kind woman in her 50s, who was impressed with Mary's reading abilities. Afternoons were filled with household chores and the children's outdoor activities, which Elizabeth supervised while completing her mending and other work. Isaac remained a somewhat distant figure, often leaving before dawn to work with the cattle or ride the boundaries of his vast property. But he joined them for supper most evenings, listening attentively to the children's accounts of their day, and occasionally offering a story of his own, usually about some aspect of ranch work, that had the children wide-eyed with interest. Elizabeth found herself watching him during these times, noticing the way his stern expression softened when Emma climbed into his lap, or how his rare smiles transformed his entire face. He was a good father, patient, attentive, and fair, which only made the mystery of his reserve toward adults more intriguing. October brought cooler temperatures and the vibrant colors of autumn to the mountains. Elizabeth discovered that the Double J had apple orchards on its eastern boundary, planted years ago by Isaac's father. One crisp Saturday, Isaac announced that it was time for the annual apple harvest, and everyone, even the youngest children, would help. The day turned into a festive occasion, with ranch hands and their families joining in. Ladders were propped against trees, baskets passed from hand to hand, and children scrambled to collect the windfalls. Mrs. Abernathy set up trestle tables laden with food and drink, and the atmosphere was one of cheerful industry. Elizabeth found herself assigned to sorting apples with some of the ranch hands' wives, separating the fruit into categories: perfect specimens for storing, slightly blemished ones for immediate eating, and damaged ones for cider and apple butter. The work was pleasant, and she enjoyed the camaraderie of the other women, who treated her with friendly respect. "Mr. James seems in good spirits today," remarked Clara, Miguel's wife, as they worked. "Haven't seen him laugh like that in ages." Elizabeth glanced toward where Isaac was helping Thomas and Johnny load a wagon with filled baskets, his deep laugh carrying across the orchard as Johnny made some comment. "The harvest seems important to him," Elizabeth observed. Clara nodded. "Family tradition, going back to his grandfather's time. Miss Kathleen used to make it into a proper celebration, had everyone over to the big house afterward for dancing and such." Her expression grew wistful. "Been more subdued these past years, but still a happy time. Dancing." Elizabeth echoed, trying to imagine the serious Isaac James participating in such frivolity. "Oh my, yes," Clara confirmed with a smile. "Mr. James is quite light on his feet for such a big man." Miss Kathleen taught him proper ballroom steps, said a ranch owner needed social graces even in the wilds of Colorado. This new information added another layer to Elizabeth's understanding of the man. She found herself watching him throughout the day, noting how he moved among his workers with easy authority, stopping to help where needed, offering praise and direction in equal measure. The ranch hands clearly respected him, and their families regarded him with genuine affection. By late afternoon, the harvest was complete, and true to Clara's word, everyone gathered at the main house. The furniture in the large parlor had been pushed back, creating a space for dancing. One of the ranch hands produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon lively music filled the room. Elizabeth busied herself helping Mrs. Abernathy serve refreshments, watching as the children participated in simple reels and circle dances. Even Annie and Emma joined in, holding hands and twirling with more enthusiasm than skill. "You should join them," came a deep voice beside her. Elizabeth turned to find Isaac standing there, his shirt sleeves rolled up and collar open after the day's work. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "Oh, I'm helping Mrs. Abernathy," she demurred. "Mrs. Abernathy can spare you for a dance," he countered, a hint of challenge in his blue eyes. "Unless you don't dance." "I do." But Elizabeth hesitated, suddenly aware of her simple work dress and hair that had partially escaped its pins during the day's activities. Isaac didn't wait for her to finish, simply extending his hand. "One dance, Mrs. Remington. Consider it part of your duties if you must." The teasing tone was so unexpected that Elizabeth found herself placing her hand in his before she could reconsider. His palm was warm and calloused against hers as he led her to the center of the room. The musicians struck up a lively Virginia reel, and Elizabeth found herself swept into the dance. Isaac moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her through the steps with confident hands. Around them, ranch hands and their wives formed lines, the children watching from the edges with delight. "You dance well," Isaac remarked as they came together in a turn. "My father insisted all his daughters learn," Elizabeth replied, slightly breathless from the pace. "He said it was an essential social skill, even in a mining town." "Wise man," Isaac commented, his hand firm at her waist as they completed another figure. The dance required them to separate and rejoin multiple times, and each time Isaac's hand found hers, Elizabeth felt a small thrill of awareness course through her. It had been so long since she had danced, longer still since she had felt the simple pleasure of a man's attention. When the music ended, Isaac bowed formally, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Remington." "Elizabeth," she said impulsively, "after 2 months in your home, perhaps you could call me Elizabeth." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. "Elizabeth, then," he agreed, his deep voice making her name sound somehow different. "And I'm Isaac, at least when we're not in front of the hands." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until little Emma tugged at Isaac's hand, demanding her turn to dance with her father. Isaac released Elizabeth's hand with a nod, turning his attention to his daughter. Elizabeth stepped back, her cheeks warm and her pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with the exertion of the dance. She watched as Isaac lifted Emma onto his feet, allowing her to stand on his boots as he guided her in a simple waltz, his large hands holding her securely. "He's different with you," came Mrs. Abernathy's voice beside her. "More like his old self." Elizabeth turned, startled. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Mrs. Abernathy's shrewd eyes held a knowing look. "Don't you? That man has been walking through life half alive since Kathleen died. First time I've seen a real spark in him is when he looks at you." "He's my employer," Elizabeth protested softly, though her heart quickened at the older woman's words. "For now, Mrs. Abernathy repeated her cryptic comment from weeks earlier, then moved away to refill the cider pitcher, leaving Elizabeth with thoughts she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The evening ended with tired but happy children, their faces sticky with apple tarts and cider. Elizabeth shepherded her 3 upstairs, where they fell asleep almost as soon as their heads touched the pillows. She returned downstairs to help with the cleanup, finding the parlor nearly empty, the ranch families having returned to their cottages. Isaac stood by the large stone fireplace, gazing into the flames, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Children asleep?" he asked. "All 6, Elizabeth confirmed. "Even Thomas, who insisted he wasn't tired at all." A small smile touched Isaac's mouth. Stubborn like his father. A family trait I've noticed, Elizabeth said lightly, beginning to gather stray cups from side tables. Isaac set down his glass and moved to help her, an unexpected gesture that had her pausing in surprise. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, restoring order to the room. "Thank you," Isaac said suddenly. Elizabeth looked up, questioning. "For helping clean, it's my job." "Not for that." He hesitated, as if searching for words unusual for a man who typically spoke with such directness. "For bringing life back to this house. The children. They're happier than they've been in a long time." The simple statement, delivered in his deep voice with such sincerity, touched Elizabeth deeply. "They're wonderful children. It's easy to care for them." Isaac nodded, his eyes holding hers. "Still, you've done more than was asked of you, made this place a home again, not just a house." "I'm glad," Elizabeth said softly. "Every child deserves a happy home. And their mother, does she not deserve happiness as well?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant. Elizabeth's breath caught. I've found contentment here, if that's what you're asking. The work is satisfying and the children bring me joy." "Contentment isn't the same as happiness," Isaac observed, taking a step closer. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the stern lines of his face less pronounced. Elizabeth was suddenly very aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his presence seemed to fill the space between them. "Happiness feels like a luxury I haven't earned yet," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac's expression grew serious. "It's not something to be earned, Elizabeth. It's something to be claimed." The use of her given name, the intensity of his gaze, the unexpected intimacy of the moment, it all combined to create a tension that was both thrilling and frightening. Elizabeth felt herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. Then, from upstairs, came the sound of crying Annie, from the pitch of it, likely having woken from a bad dream. The spell broke and Elizabeth stepped back. "I should go to her," she said, her voice unsteady. Isaac nodded, his own expression returning to its usual reserved state. "Of course. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Isaac." His name felt strange on her tongue, a small intimacy she wasn't sure she had the right to claim. As she climbed the stairs to comfort Annie, Elizabeth's mind whirled with confusion. What had just happened between them? What had almost happened? And more importantly, what did she want to happen? The answers to those questions were dangerous territory indeed. November arrived with the first snowfall, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white that had the children wild with excitement. School lessons were temporarily forgotten as they built snowmen, made snow angels, and engaged in spirited snowball fights under Elizabeth's watchful eye. The approaching holidays also brought a shift in the household routine. Mrs. Abernathy began preparations for Thanksgiving, while Elizabeth found herself planning Christmas decorations and helping the children create simple gifts for one another. The Double J took on a festive atmosphere that only enhanced the growing sense of home Elizabeth felt within its walls. Her relationship with Isaac remained cordial but careful after their moment by the fireplace. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, occasionally joining her and the children for evening activities, but maintaining a certain distance that Elizabeth told herself was appropriate. After all, she was still his employee, regardless of Mrs. Abernathy's knowing looks or the children's increasing tendency to treat them as a unified parental unit. It was during the second week of November that trouble arrived in the form of a letter from town. Elizabeth was helping Emma and Annie string cranberries for decorations when Isaac entered the sitting room, his expression troubled as he held out a folded paper. "This came for you," he said. "From Promise Creek." Elizabeth took it with a puzzled frown. No one in town wrote to her regularly. Opening it, she scanned the contents, her face paling as she read. "What is it?" Isaac asked, noting her reaction. "It's from Mr. Paulson at the general store," Elizabeth said, her voice tight. "My former landlord in town is claiming I left owing 2 months' rent. He's threatening to sell what few possessions we left behind if it's not paid by month's end." "Did you owe the rent?" Isaac asked, his tone neutral. Elizabeth shook her head firmly. "No, I paid every penny before we left. Mr. Grayson gave me a receipt, which is—" She trailed off, realizing with dismay, "which is probably among the papers in the trunk we left in the storeroom at the boarding house." Isaac's jaw tightened. Convenient for him. "He always was opportunistic," Elizabeth said bitterly, "but I never thought he would stoop to outright fraud." "How much is he claiming?" $12. Elizabeth folded the letter, her hands trembling slightly with anger. "It might as well be 100 for all my ability to pay it right now." Isaac was silent for a moment, watching as Elizabeth composed herself, conscious of the children's curious eyes. "I'll advance it from your wages," he said finally. "No," Elizabeth replied, more sharply than she intended. Softening her tone, she added, "Thank you, but no. I won't pay for something I don't owe. It would only encourage further false claims." Isaac studied her with newfound respect. "What will you do?" "I need to go to town," Elizabeth decided. "Confront him directly, find that receipt if possible." "Town is a 3-hour ride in good weather," Isaac pointed out. "With snow, longer. And the children, I can manage the children for a day," Mrs. Abernathy interjected, having entered in time to hear the conversation. "Not their first mother gone for a spell." Elizabeth shot her a grateful look. "If you're sure." "Course I'm sure," the older woman huffed. "Been handling young uns since before you were born." Isaac nodded slowly. "I'll take you to town tomorrow. Need to speak with the banker anyway." "You don't need to escort me," Elizabeth protested. "I can manage in this weather." "Alone." Isaac's tone brooked no argument. "We leave at first light. Be ready." With that, he strode from the room, leaving Elizabeth both grateful for his assistance and irritated by his high-handedness. The man had a talent for evoking both emotions simultaneously. The following morning dawned clear and cold. Elizabeth dressed warmly in her sturdiest clothes, kissed her sleepy children goodbye, and joined Isaac in the yard where he waited with 2 saddled horses. "No wagon?" she asked, eyeing the horses with trepidation. She could ride, but it had been years. "Trails are too narrow with the snowdrifts," Isaac explained. "Don't worry, Daisy is gentle as a lamb." The journey to Promise Creek was challenging but beautiful. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, transforming familiar terrain into something magical. Isaac set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the land they passed. By the time the town came into view, Elizabeth felt more at ease in the saddle and with her taciturn companion. Promise Creek looked smaller somehow after her months at the ranch. The main street, with its dusty storefronts and weather-beaten boardwalks, seemed less imposing than she remembered. As they rode past the general store, Elizabeth noticed curtains twitching in windows. Their arrival was causing a stir. "People are staring," she murmured. Isaac's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Small town. No entertainment but gossip. They tied their horses at the hitching post outside the boarding house where Elizabeth had once lived. Mr. Grayson, a thin man with perpetually suspicious eyes, was sweeping the porch when they arrived. He straightened at the sight of Elizabeth, his expression quickly shifting from surprise to calculation. "Mrs. Remington," he greeted, his gaze sliding to Isaac with obvious curiosity. "Didn't expect to see you back in town." "I received your message about the alleged unpaid rent," Elizabeth said, dispensing with pleasantries. "I've come for my receipt and the trunk we left in your storeroom." Grayson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Receipt? Don't recall giving one." "As for the trunk, it's security against your debt." "There is no debt," Elizabeth stated firmly. "I paid in full before leaving, and you know it, Mr. Grayson." The landlord's expression hardened. "Your word against mine, Mrs. Remington. And in case you've forgotten, your reputation in this town isn't exactly sterling." Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implied insult. Before she could respond, Isaac stepped forward, his tall figure suddenly imposing. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his deep voice deceptively mild. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Isaac James, owner of the Double J Ranch." Grayson's eyes widened slightly at the name. Isaac's reputation clearly preceded him. "Mr. James, an honor. Didn't realize you and Mrs. Remington were acquainted, Mrs. Remington manages my household and cares for my children," Isaac replied evenly. "Her integrity is beyond question." "Well, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," Grayson backpedaled, his manner suddenly obsequious. "Perhaps if we check my ledger again." "That would be wise," Isaac agreed, the steel beneath his polite tone unmistakable. "And while you're at it, we'll need access to Mrs. Remington's trunk." Grayson hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, right this way." The matter was resolved within the hour. The misplaced receipt was miraculously found, the trunk retrieved from the storeroom, and Grayson's profuse apologies accepted with cool civility. By the time they left the boarding house, Elizabeth was trembling with suppressed anger. "The nerve of that man," she fumed as they loaded the trunk onto Thunderbolt, who was strong enough to carry the additional weight. "He knew I had the receipt. He was counting on me not being able to return to town to dispute his claim." Isaac secured the trunk with practiced movements. "Men like that prey on those they perceive as vulnerable, single women especially." "I've dealt with worse," Elizabeth said grimly, thinking of the countless small humiliations she had endured in Promise Creek as a widow with children. Isaac's gaze was sharp. "Is that why you accepted my job offer so readily? To escape this town's judgment?" Elizabeth met his eyes squarely. "Partly, but mostly for the security it offered my children. $30 a month is more than I could earn here in 3 months of laundry and mending." Isaac nodded, seemingly satisfied with her honesty. "We have one more stop to make, Paulson's store. He asked to see you when I mentioned we were coming to town." The bell above the general store door jingled as they entered. Mr. Paulson looked up from where he was measuring fabric for a customer, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile at the sight of Elizabeth. "Mrs. Remington, wonderful to see you looking so well." He finished serving his customer before approaching them. "And Mr. James, thank you for bringing her." "Mr. Paulson," Elizabeth greeted warmly. "Your letter was most timely. Thank you for the warning about Mr. Grayson's scheme. Couldn't stand by and watch him cheat you," the storekeeper said simply. "How are the children?" "Settling in at the ranch, thriving," Elizabeth replied with a smile. "Mary's reading has improved tremendously with Mrs. Harrison's lessons, and Johnny talks of nothing but horses from morning till night." While they caught up, Isaac wandered to another part of the store, examining tools displayed on a wall, giving them privacy for their conversation. Elizabeth was explaining Annie's progress with her letters when the store door opened again, admitting a gust of cold air and Hester Wilson, the banker's sister, whose cruel remarks had precipitated Elizabeth's departure from town. Hester stopped short at the sight of Elizabeth, her pinched features registering surprise before settling into their habitual disdainful expression. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Remington. Word is you've found employment at the James Ranch." "As what precisely?" "The laundry woman." The deliberate insult hung in the air. Mr. Paulson frowned, but before he could intervene, Isaac's deep voice came from behind Elizabeth. "Mrs. Remington manages my household and children with exceptional skill, Mrs. Wilson. Her position is one of considerable responsibility and respect." Hester's gaze darted to Isaac, who had moved to stand beside Elizabeth, his tall figure radiating quiet authority. "Mr. James, I didn't realize you were in town. My brother was hoping to speak with you about that land purchase." "Another time," Isaac said dismissively. "We're heading back to the ranch shortly." His use of "we" and his protective stance beside Elizabeth were not lost on Hester, whose eyes narrowed with speculation. "I see. Well, how interesting. I'm sure the children benefit from having a woman's influence, however temporary." The implication that Elizabeth's position was merely a stopgap arrangement sent a pang through her heart, all the more painful because it echoed her own secret fears. She straightened her spine, determined not to show how the barb had landed. "The James children are a joy to care for," she said evenly. "As are mine. All 6 are thriving together." Hester's smile was sharp. 6 children under one roof must be quite chaotic. I imagine Mr. James will be seeking a more permanent arrangement eventually. A man in his position needs a proper wife, not just a housekeeper. Before Elizabeth could respond, Isaac spoke, his tone deceptively casual. "You know, Mrs. Wilson, I've always found that those most concerned with propriety are often least acquainted with common decency." Hester flushed an ugly red. "I was merely making conversation." "Were you?" Isaac's blue eyes were cold. "Sounded more like you were attempting to diminish a woman who has shown more courage, dignity, and maternal devotion than most could imagine." He placed a hand lightly at the small of Elizabeth's back. "We should be going if we want to reach home before dark." The touch, gentle but firm, steadied Elizabeth as they bid farewell to Mr. Paulson and exited the store. Outside, fat snowflakes had begun to fall, promising a challenging ride home. "We should have stayed at the hotel," Elizabeth fretted, looking at the darkening sky. "No," Isaac said firmly. "The children will worry if we don't return." He helped her mount Daisy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "We'll take it slowly. I know these trails even in the dark." They rode in silence for the first hour, the falling snow creating a hushed, otherworldly atmosphere. Elizabeth's thoughts kept returning to Hester's words and Isaac's unexpected defense. His touch on her back had felt proprietary, protective in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft in the stillness, "for what you said to Mrs. Wilson. And to Mr. Grayson." Isaac glanced at her, snowflakes clinging to his hat brim and the shoulders of his heavy coat. "Only spoke the truth. Still, you didn't have to defend me. Didn't do it out of obligation," he replied after a moment. "Did it because you deserve better than their judgment." The simple statement warmed Elizabeth more effectively than any fire. They rode on as the snow fell harder, the world narrowing to just the 2 of them and their horses moving through a white landscape. It was nearly dark when Isaac suddenly reined in, looking at the sky with concern. "Storm's worsening. We need shelter." Elizabeth followed his gaze to the heavy clouds, the snowfall now thick enough to obscure the trail ahead. "Where?" "Line cabin about half a mile east," Isaac decided. "Used by the hands when they're working this section, basic but dry." They altered course, and soon a small log structure emerged from the swirling snow. It was indeed basic, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. But it was shelter, and Elizabeth had never been so glad to see 4 walls and a roof. Isaac moved with efficiency, tending to the horses in the small lean-to stable attached to the cabin while Elizabeth took stock of their supplies. The cabin was kept provisioned with basic necessities: dried beans, coffee, flour, and jerky, and a stack of firewood was neatly piled beside the fireplace. By the time Isaac stamped the snow from his boots and entered, Elizabeth had a fire crackling in the grate and water heating for coffee. "Storms set in for the night," he announced, shrugging off his heavy coat. "No traveling until morning." Elizabeth nodded, trying to ignore the implications of spending the night alone with him in such close quarters. "I found coffee and some food." "It's not much, but it'll do," Isaac assured her, moving to warm his hands by the fire. In the small space, he seemed even larger, his presence filling the cabin. They worked together to prepare a simple meal of beans and hardtack softened in coffee. The domestic routine felt strangely intimate in these circumstances, just the two of them, snow falling outside, the cabin growing warm and comfortable around them. "The children will be worried," Elizabeth said as they sat at the small table. "Mrs. Abernathy will know we sheltered from the storm," Isaac replied. "She's seen Colorado weather longer than either of us." Elizabeth nodded, taking comfort in his calm assurance. After their meal, she washed their few dishes in melted snow while Isaac added wood to the fire. The domesticity of it all felt right in a way that surprised her. "You should take the cot," Isaac said, nodding toward the narrow bed. "I'll sleep by the fire." "That doesn't seem fair," Elizabeth protested. "It's your cabin." "And you're a lady," he countered, his tone brooking no argument. Elizabeth conceded, too tired to debate further. She removed her boots and outer layers but kept on her dress, acutely aware of his presence as she slipped under the rough blanket on the cot. Isaac settled himself on his bedroll near the fire, his back to her in a gesture of respect for her privacy. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the soft moaning of the wind outside. Elizabeth stared at the log ceiling, exhausted but too aware of Isaac's proximity to sleep. "What Mrs. Wilson said." Isaac spoke suddenly into the darkness, his deep voice thoughtful. "About me needing a proper wife, not a housekeeper. Does that bother you?" The unexpected question had Elizabeth propping herself up on one elbow, squinting to make out his form in the firelight. He was still facing away from her. "Should it?" she asked carefully. "You're a widower with 3 children. It would be natural for you to remarry eventually." Isaac rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "Been 3 years since Kathleen died. Thought I'd never want another wife." Elizabeth's heart quickened at the past tense. "And now?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Now I find myself reconsidering." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Elizabeth's throat felt dry, her pulse racing. "Isaac," she began, unsure what she even wanted to say. He sat up, the firelight casting his features in stark relief: the strong jaw, the straight nose, the penetrating eyes that could be so stern and yet so gentle with his children. "With her children. You don't need to say anything," he told her quietly. "Just wanted you to know where my thoughts have been heading. No expectations, no pressure." Elizabeth swallowed hard. "The children would need time to adjust to any change in our relationship." "They've already adjusted to you as more than a housekeeper," Isaac pointed out. "Thomas asked me last week if you were going to be their new mother." "He did?" Elizabeth whispered, genuinely surprised. "What did you tell him?" "Told him that was something you and I would need to discuss when the time was right," Isaac replied. "Told him no matter what, you cared for him and his sisters." "I do," Elizabeth said softly. "Very much." Isaac nodded, holding her gaze across the small cabin. "I know, it's one of the reasons I—" He hesitated, then finished simply, "one of the many reasons." The unfinished sentiment filled Elizabeth with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. They looked at each other for a long moment, the crackling flames and howling wind creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. "We should sleep," Isaac said finally, breaking the spell. "Long ride tomorrow." "Yes," Elizabeth agreed, lying back down. "Good night, Isaac." "Good night, Elizabeth." As she drifted toward sleep, Elizabeth found herself thinking not of the cold journey ahead but of 6 children waiting for them at home, their home, perhaps in more ways than one. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed world of pristine white. They rode out at dawn, the horses picking their way carefully through deep snow. Isaac led them on a slightly different route, avoiding the worst drifts, and by mid-morning the Double J Ranch came into view, smoke rising cheerfully from its chimneys. As they approached, the front door burst open and children spilled onto the porch, all 6 of them, with Mrs. Abernathy standing behind them like a vigilant hen with too many chicks. "Mama," Annie cried, waving frantically. "Papa Isaac, you came back, Papa Isaac." The innocent words sent a jolt through Elizabeth. She glanced at Isaac, who had reined in his horse, his expression unreadable. "She doesn't understand," Elizabeth began apologetically. "I'll explain to her that." "No need," Isaac cut in, his voice gentle. "I don't mind." He met her gaze, something warm and questioning in his blue eyes. "Unless you do." Elizabeth's heart swelled with unexpected emotion. "No," she admitted softly. "I don't mind either." They rode the last few yards in companionable silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them, even if neither was quite ready to name it. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were filled with preparations and excitement. Elizabeth threw herself into helping Mrs. Abernathy plan the feast, which would include not only their household but also the ranch hands and their families. It was to be a proper celebration, Isaac declared, the first real holiday gathering at the Double J since Kathleen's death. Throughout these busy days, Elizabeth was keenly aware of Isaac's gaze following her, of the way he found reasons to be in whatever room she was working in, of the brush of his hand against hers when they passed in the hallway. Small moments, easily dismissed individually, but collectively painting a picture of a man who was courting her with quiet deliberation. The night before Thanksgiving, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Abernathy had retired to her quarters, Elizabeth found herself alone in the kitchen, making final preparations for the morning baking. She was humming softly as she worked, content in the quiet domesticity of the moment. "That's a pretty tune," came Isaac's deep voice from the doorway. Elizabeth turned, flour dusting her apron, to find him leaning against the doorframe, watching her with unconcealed appreciation. He had changed from his work clothes into a clean shirt and trousers, his dark hair still damp from washing. "My mother used to sing it while she baked," Elizabeth explained, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. Isaac stepped into the kitchen, closing the door quietly behind him. "You remind me of her sometimes in the kitchen with the children, always calm, always kind." "I try," Elizabeth said, touched by the observation. "Your mother taught you well." "She did," Isaac agreed, moving closer. "Taught me to recognize a good woman when I found one." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Elizabeth's hands stilled on the dough she'd been kneading. "Isaac," she began hesitantly, "what's happening between us?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Something I didn't expect," he admitted. "Something I wasn't looking for, nor I," Elizabeth confessed. "When I came here, I was thinking only of providing for my children, not—" She gestured vaguely between them, "not finding a partner," Isaac supplied, his directness both challenging and reassuring. "Yes." Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "It complicates things, does it?" Isaac took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Seems to me it simplifies them. You need security for your children. I need a mother for mine. We both need—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. companionship, understanding. Is that all? Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac's expression softened. No, that's not all. He reached out, his large hand gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light but sent warmth cascading through her. I didn't think I'd feel this way again, he murmured. After Kathleen died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. I understand, Elizabeth said softly. After Richard, I never imagined. But here we are, Isaac finished for her. Here we are, she echoed. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared understanding filling the space between them. Then, with deliberate slowness, Isaac leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to Elizabeth's eyes. It was a tentative beginning, a question as much as a statement. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for a response. Elizabeth answered by rising on her tiptoes and returning his kiss, her flour-dusted hands coming to rest lightly on his broad shoulders. Isaac's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something more an acknowledgement of feelings too long contained, of possibilities opening before them like a path through darkness. When they finally separated, Elizabeth's cheeks were flushed, her heart racing. Isaac's expression was one of wonder and satisfaction combined. I've wanted to do that since the apple harvest, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Elizabeth smiled, feeling strangely shy yet completely at ease in his embrace. Only that long. A smile, a real, full smile that transformed his serious face broke across Isaac's features. Maybe longer, just didn't want to admit it to myself. And now, she asked, suddenly uncertain again. Isaac's hands tightened slightly at her waist. Now I think we have some decisions to make, together. The children, Elizabeth began. Already consider us a family, Isaac pointed out. Haven't you noticed? The way they look to both of us for guidance. The way they've sorted themselves into siblings regardless of blood. It was true, Elizabeth realized. Mary and Sarah were inseparable, while Thomas had taken Johnny under his wing like a younger brother. Annie and Emma were as close as twins despite their different temperaments. I have noticed, she acknowledged. But it's a big step from being a housekeeper to being a wife, Isaac finished. Mother to my children, partner in all things, the words, spoken plainly in his deep voice, sent a thrill through Elizabeth's heart. Yes, exactly. Isaac's expression grew serious again. I don't make this proposal lightly, Elizabeth. I'm not asking out of convenience or practicality, though those factors exist. I'm asking because in these months of watching you care for my children alongside your own, of seeing your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your grace under pressure, I've come to admire you. To respect you, he paused, his blue eyes intent on hers, to love you. The declaration, simple and straightforward like the man himself, brought fresh tears to Elizabeth's eyes. Oh, Isaac, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take time to think, to be sure. I know it hasn't been that long since. Elizabeth placed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping his words. Since we met? No, but sometimes time isn't the measure that matters. She took a deep breath, her heart full to bursting with an emotion she had thought forever lost to her. I love you too. And yes, I will marry you if that's what you're asking. The joy that transformed Isaac's face was answer enough, but he pulled her close and kissed her again, this time with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he said softly. We'll tell the children tomorrow after the Thanksgiving feast, start our new life together with gratitude. Elizabeth nodded, happiness bubbling up within her like a spring. A perfect beginning. And then we'll ride to town next week, speak to the preacher about a Christmas wedding, Isaac continued, his practical nature reasserting itself. No sense in waiting once we've decided. The thought of becoming Mrs. James in just a few weeks sent a flutter of excitement through Elizabeth's chest. "The town will talk," she warned, thinking of Hester Wilson and her ilk. Isaac's expression hardened briefly. "Let them. Anyone who mocks you for being a widow with 3 children will answer to me." His face softened again as he added, "Besides, my children have been waiting to call you Ma since the day you arrived. About time we made it official." The words, so similar to what he'd said that day in the general store, reminded Elizabeth of how far they had come from employer and employee to something much more profound. From 2 broken families to one whole one. "I never expected this," she confessed, nestling against his broad chest. "When I came here, I was just hoping for security, for a safe place for my children. And I never expected to find love again," Isaac murmured into her hair. "Yet here we are." "Here we are," Elizabeth agreed, her heart full of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to this place, to this man, to this unexpected second chance at happiness. Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland. The Double J bustled with activity as ranch hands and their families arrived for the celebration, bearing additional dishes to contribute to the feast. The large dining table had been extended with trestle tables into the parlor to accommodate everyone, and the atmosphere was festive and warm. Elizabeth moved through the preparations with a secret joy in her heart, exchanging glances with Isaac whenever their paths crossed. They had agreed to wait until after the meal to announce their engagement, wanting this special moment to be shared with everyone who had become their extended family. The feast itself was a raucous, joyful affair, with platters of roast turkey, ham, and venison crowding the tables alongside bowls of vegetables, freshly baked bread, and Mrs. Abernathy's famous apple pies. Isaac, seated at the head of the table with Elizabeth at his right, and the children arranged around them, offered a brief but heartfelt grace, his deep voice carrying through the rooms. "For the bounty before us, for the hands that prepared it, for the company that shares it, we give thanks," he said simply. "And for new beginnings, unexpected blessings, and the family gathered here both by blood and by choice, we are especially grateful." His blue eyes met Elizabeth's as he spoke the last words, a private message in his public prayer. She smiled back, her heart too full for words. After the meal, when the children had run off to play and the adults were enjoying coffee and final slices of pie, Isaac stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him expectantly. "I have an announcement," he began, his deep voice carrying easily. "One that I hope will bring as much joy to all of you as it does to me." He extended his hand to Elizabeth, who rose to stand beside him, her cheeks flushing with pleased embarrassment at being the center of attention. "Mrs. Elizabeth Remington has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife," Isaac continued, his hand warm around hers. "We'll be married before Christmas, God willing." A moment of surprised silence was followed by a chorus of congratulations and cheers. Mrs. Abernathy wiped a suspicious moisture from her eyes, while Hank, the foreman, grinned broadly and declared it about time. The children, hearing the commotion, came running back inside. Thomas, perceiving the situation first, broke into a wide smile. "Does this mean Mrs. Remington will be our mother now? For real?" Isaac nodded, his expression softening as he looked at his son. "Yes, if that's all right with you 3. "Yes," Emma exclaimed, launching herself at Elizabeth's skirts. "I wanted a mama again." Sarah nodded solemnly, her blonde braids bobbing. "Me too." "And Mary and Johnny and Annie will be our real brother and sister." Mary, always the most thoughtful of Elizabeth's children, looked between her mother and Isaac with wide eyes. "Are you happy, Mama? Do you love Mr. James?" Elizabeth knelt down to her daughter's level, taking Mary's small hands in hers. "Yes, sweetheart, I love him very much. And I love his children too, just as he loves you and Johnny and Annie." Johnny, who had been watching the proceedings with unusual silence, suddenly piped up. "Does this mean I can call you Pa now?" he asked Isaac directly. Isaac's expression, usually so controlled, revealed a moment of deep emotion before he replied. "I would be honored, Johnny. Nothing would make me prouder than to be called Pa by you." Little Annie, not to be left out, tugged at Isaac's trouser leg until he lifted her into his arms. "Papa Isaac," she declared decisively, patting his cheek with her small hand. The spontaneous acceptance of the children brought fresh tears to Elizabeth's eyes. Looking around at their extended family, the ranch hands and their wives, Mrs. Abernathy beaming her approval, and the 6 children who had already formed bonds stronger than blood, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in the truest sense. Isaac's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close to his side as the congratulations continued. "Happy," he murmured for her ears alone. Elizabeth looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in these months. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word spread quickly through the county, and Elizabeth found herself touched by the genuine goodwill expressed by most of their neighbors. Even in Promise Creek, where they rode to speak with the minister, many townspeople offered congratulations. Hester Wilson was noticeably silent when she encountered them at the general store, though her pinched expression spoke volumes. Elizabeth found, to her surprise, that the woman's disapproval no longer stung. She had found her place, her purpose, her family. What did Hester's judgment matter now? The wedding itself was set for the Saturday before Christmas, to be held in the ranch chapel that Isaac had built for his first wife. Elizabeth, initially concerned that the location might hold painful memories for Isaac, was reassured by his explanation. Kathleen would have wanted the chapel used for joyful occasions, he told her as they walked the snowy path between the main house and the small church one evening. She believed in love, in second chances. "She made me promise when she knew she was dying that I wouldn't shut myself away from life." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Elizabeth said sincerely. "She was," Isaac agreed, his expression contemplative but not pained. "Different from you in many ways, but similar in the ones that matter most: kindness, strength, devotion to family." He squeezed Elizabeth's hand. "She would have approved of you, especially of how you love the children." The simple statement meant more to Elizabeth than grand declarations ever could. To have Isaac's blessing to love the children Kathleen had borne, to take her place not as a replacement, but as a continuation of the love their mother had given them, it was a precious gift indeed. On their wedding day, snow fell gently outside while the chapel glowed with warmth from a crackling fire and dozens of candles. Elizabeth wore a new dress of deep blue velvet, a gift from Isaac that complemented her chestnut hair and brought out the hazel of her eyes. Mary, Sarah, and Emma served as her attendants, each wearing matching dresses of lighter blue, their excitement barely contained as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Johnny and Thomas, solemn in their Sunday best, stood beside Isaac at the altar. Annie, deemed too young for formal duties, sat with Mrs. Abernathy in the front pew, clutching her beloved rag doll now fully restored after her dunking in the creek, and sporting a new dress sewn by Elizabeth for the occasion. As Elizabeth walked down the short aisle on Mr. Paulson's arm, the storekeeper having traveled from Promise Creek to give her away, she felt none of the nervousness she had expected. Instead, a profound peace filled her heart as she approached Isaac, whose blue eyes never left her face. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly before the minister, their ranch family, and God. When Isaac slipped the gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he told her, passed down through generations of James women, Elizabeth felt the final piece of her new life click into place. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Isaac's kiss was tender but held a promise of passion that brought a blush to Elizabeth's cheeks and a knowing smile to Mrs. Abernathy's lips. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing in the main house, abundant food prepared by Mrs. Abernathy and the ranch wives, and the 6 children moving among the guests like miniature hosts, their pride in their newly official family evident to all. As evening deepened, Isaac found Elizabeth standing by the window, watching the snow fall in the glow of lanterns hung from the porch. "Happy, Mrs. James?" he asked, his arms slipping around her waist in what had become a familiar and cherished gesture. "Very," she replied, leaning into his solid strength, "though it still sounds strange to hear that name." "You'll get used to it," he assured her, his voice warm with promise. "You have a lifetime to practice." Elizabeth turned in his embrace, looking up at the face of her husband, a word that, like her new name, would take some getting used to, but one she cherished already. "A lifetime sounds perfect," she murmured, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Their moment was interrupted by a tug at Elizabeth's skirt. Looking down, she found Emma and Annie standing hand in hand, their party dresses slightly rumpled from play. "Mama," Emma said solemnly, using the title that had become natural in the weeks since the engagement, "Annie says she's my sister now for real. Is that true?" Elizabeth knelt down, gathering both girls into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart, your sisters now in every way that matters. Family." "And Johnny and Thomas are our brothers," Annie added importantly. "And Mary is our big sister." "That's right," Isaac confirmed, his large hand gentle on each small head. "One family with 2 parents who love all 6 of you very much." Emma's face lit up with satisfaction. "I told Hester Wilson's niece that I had a new mama and 3 new brothers and sisters. She said I was lying." Her small brow furrowed with indignation. "But I wasn't." "No, you weren't," Elizabeth agreed, exchanging a look with Isaac over the girls' heads. "Some people don't understand that families can come together in different ways." "Their loss," Isaac said simply, helping Elizabeth to her feet. "Now, I believe these young ladies promised me a dance earlier." As Isaac led the giggling girls to the center of the room where other couples were dancing, Elizabeth watched with a full heart. From across the room, Mary caught her eye and smiled a knowing, mature smile that spoke of her understanding and approval of this new chapter in their lives. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep in their beds, the James children and Remington children, now simply brothers and sisters under one roof, Elizabeth stood in the master bedroom that would now be hers and Isaac's shared sanctuary. Her new nightgown, a confection of white lace and satin that was far more elaborate than anything she'd owned before, felt strange against her skin as she brushed out her long chestnut hair. When Isaac entered, freshly washed and wearing only trousers and an open-collared shirt, his eyes darkened at the sight of her. "You're beautiful," he said simply, crossing to where she sat at the dressing table. Elizabeth blushed, setting down her brush. "Thank you." His large hands came to rest on her shoulders, their warmth seeping through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "Nervous?" he asked softly, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time since." For me too, Isaac reminded her gently. We'll learn each other. No rush. The tenderness in his voice, the patience in his touch as he helped her rise and drew her into his arms, melted away Elizabeth's remaining nervousness. This was Isaac, her husband, the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and still chosen her, the man who loved her children as his own. Their first coming together as husband and wife was both an ending and a beginning, the culmination of months of growing feelings, and the start of a deeper intimacy that would carry them through the years ahead. Isaac's strength was tempered by gentleness, his passion by reverence, and in his arms Elizabeth found a belonging she had thought forever lost to her. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the large bed that had once seemed so empty to both of them, Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "When I offered you that job in the general store," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "I never imagined we'd end up here." Elizabeth smiled, her head resting on his broad chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "When you defended me against Hester Wilson's mockery, I never imagined I'd find a man who would love not only me but my children too." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made, bringing you to the Double J. 6 children might seem a lot to some, but to me, it's exactly right." 6 children and counting, Elizabeth said softly, placing his hand over her stomach. "Perhaps in time." Isaac's breath caught, his blue eyes widening with wonder and hope. "I'd like that," he said simply. "Very much." Elizabeth smiled, nestling closer to the man who had become her partner, protector, and love. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their world in pristine white, a symbol of the fresh start they had found together. Inside, warmth and love surrounded them, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by commitment, by love that had overcome mockery and doubt to bloom in the most unexpected of places. "I love you, Isaac James," Elizabeth whispered, the words still new enough to thrill her. "And I love you, Elizabeth James," he replied, sealing the declaration with a kiss that promised many more to come. As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms, both knew they had found their true home at last, not in a place, but in each other, in the family they had created together, in the love that had transformed them from 2 broken halves into one whole, stronger than either had been alone. And in Promise Creek, where Elizabeth had once endured whispers and mockery for being a widow with 3 children, the tale would be told for years to come, how the stern rancher had declared that his children were waiting to call her Ma, and how 6 children became one family under the bright Colorado sky.